All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to solve a fascinating economic mystery. And our detective? Well, it's not who you'd expect. We're talking about the Big Mac Index, a surprisingly powerful tool that shows us what we're really paying for things all over the world. So, let's start with a mystery you've probably experienced firsthand. I like to call it the sneaker price puzzle, and it really boils down to one simple, nagging question. Why do you end up paying so much more for the exact same stuff?
You know the feeling, right? You see a pair of sneakers you absolutely have to have. You look up the price online in the US, then you see what it costs in your local store. And ouch, it just doesn't make any sense.
And this just nails the problem. Let's say those shoes are $100 in the States. Then you look at the price in Australia, and it's the equivalent of $300. Even after you factor in the exchange rate, that is a massive, massive difference. So what on earth is going on here?
Okay, to figure this out, we first have to talk about how prices are supposed to work, in a perfect world, according to economists. There's a theory for all this, and it's actually pretty simple when you break it down.
It's called Purchasing Power Parity. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful, but all it really means is that a product should cost the same amount everywhere once you do the currency conversion. So, that $100 pair of sneakers, it should cost the equivalent of $100 whether you're in Sydney, Seoul, or Stockholm. Simple, right?
And here's how it should work, ideally. People buy and sell stuff across borders, right? That changes the demand for different currencies. So exchange rates move up and down to adjust. And over time, poof, prices should even out all over the globe. It's a nice, neat theory. But as we all know from painful experience, real life is way messier. The perfect world of economics and the real world where we actually shop, they're two totally different universes. So clearly, we need a better way to measure the gap between the theory and reality. And this is where our unlikely hero makes its grand entrance. The one thing that can slice through all the noise and tell us what's really happening. And believe it or not, the answer doesn't come from some complicated financial report, it comes from a fast food menu. So if the official economic theories don't quite cut it, how do we actually measure how much more or less we're paying? What's the yardstick we can actually trust? Well, the answer is a product so consistent, so universal, that it acts as the perfect benchmark for the entire global economy. And I am, of course, talking about the Big Mac. And this is why it's so perfect for the job. See, unlike sneakers, a Big Mac is pretty much a Big Mac everywhere you go. It has these incredible economic superpowers. It's sold in over 100 countries, it's made with the same raw ingredients, marketed the same way, and its price is super easy to find. It's the one constant in a world full of economic variables. Okay, so let's get into how this all comes together. How do we take the simple price of a burger and turn it into a real economic insight? It's actually way more straightforward than you'd think. First, we need a starting point. Just to keep the math easy, let's say a Big Mac in the United States costs exactly $2. That's our anchor. Everything else gets compared back to this. Next up, we need the exchange rate. Again, keeping it simple, let's pretend the rate between the US and Australian dollar is 1.5. So, for every $1, you get 1.5 Aussie dollars. So, in that perfect economic world we talked about, what should the price be? Well, you'd take the $2 US price and multiply it by the 1.5 exchange rate, which gives you exactly 3 Australian dollars. That's our expected price. Now for the moment of truth. We compare that $3 expected price to what a Big Mac actually costs in Australia. If it only costs $1, hey, the Australian consumer is way better off. But if it costs $4, then they're paying more than they should be. They're worse off. It really is that simple. So now we know how to read the index. But what does it actually tell us about the real world? Why are you paying more for things? Well, the data shows some pretty fascinating and kind of frustrating truths about what's going on in your wallet. Take a look at this snapshot from the 2024 index. It shows that in countries like Switzerland and Norway, consumers are getting a pretty good deal. They're better off. But in places like Australia, South Korea, and Hong Kong, consumers are paying more than they should be. They are, without a doubt, worse off. So why the huge gap? Well, there are some obvious reasons. Things like import taxes and different government policies play a big part. I mean, just think about gas prices. They're never going to be the same everywhere because every country taxes fuel differently. That part at least makes sense. But there's another sneakier factor at play: corporate strategy. A lot of the newer e-commerce brands tend to charge one price globally, You pay the same no matter where you are. But older, legacy brands, they often use country-specific pricing, which, let's be honest, almost always means people outside the US end up paying more.
And this really hits hard in countries that don't have a ton of their own major global brands. Places like Australia, for example, rely heavily on American and British companies for the latest trends, which makes their consumers especially vulnerable to this kind of regional price hike. And that right there is why the Big Mac Index is so brilliant. As one source put it so perfectly, that one burger keeps track of how much the consumer is getting screwed in each and every country. I mean, what a line! It's a simple, public scorecard for fairness.
So, that humble burger is way more than just lunch. It's a powerful economic tool that tells a story about global markets, corporate strategies, and what's fair. The next time you see a price tag that just seems a little too high, maybe you'll stop and ask yourself, I wonder what the Big Mac has to say about this.